All right, here we are, second to final day of our overview of the church's history, A World at War. Okay, so you should know that between 1914 and 1957 is when World War One and World War Two occurred. So we're going to look at how the church responded to these things. Of course, this is a period of political and social unrest and a lot of war and communism and all kinds of things. So let's dig in. It's obviously a short period of time as well, but let's see what happens. Okay, so the most violent period in the history of the world. So, of course, in World War One, you get about 20 million deaths. About half of those are combatants in the war. About half are civilians. So that's pretty impressive. And of course, that was the supposedly the war to end all wars. And then you get World War Two with about 70 to 85 million deaths. That includes the Holocaust, what Stalin did in Russia as well. So that includes a lot of, and probably mostly civilian deaths, actually. I think around 20 million of those were actual combatants. Okay, but just a tremendous amount of death across the world at this point. And then, of course, the Korean War was a relatively minor incident after that, from about 50 to 53. And the Cold War begins after World War II. All right. You get the communist revolution in Russia, which, of course, sets the stage for the Cold War. It spreads to China and all kinds of other places. So the conflict in Vietnam, of course, is an extension of that. And yeah, so that ends up being a worldwide problem. The church has to confront that because communism declares itself to be anti religious. Okay, so the state has to be your highest loyalty, the community, because the individual is essentially worthless except as a member of the community. So anyway, it's explicitly anti-religious and anti-Christian, anti-Catholic. So communism persecutes Christianity wherever it finds it. All right, the popes also then respond to the spread of communism and other forms of totalitarianism, Nazism, we will see, uh, by issuing social encyclicals. Okay, encyclicals are letters from the pope to the church at large. Okay, and so through these encyclicals, the popes develop their social teaching. Also, Pope Pius XII issues a series of Christmas radio addresses between 1942 and 45, which are further development of Catholic social teaching. So we'll see a few of these pop up. Again, that's important because next semester we're spending our entire semester on Catholic social teaching. All right. Um, the church during World War II officially maintains neutrality. Okay. The reason for that is because if it picked a side, it would only increase the persecution of Catholics in Germany, okay, and throughout Europe. So people were critical of the church for not picking the side of the Allies explicitly, okay. However, what the church found is that when it openly opposed the Nazi regime in particular, the Nazis ramped up their persecution of Catholics. So part of that, a major part of that, was basically to avoid that happening. Okay, to avoid ratcheting up the persecution. However, before World War II, we'll see in 1933, Pope Pius XI and representatives of Hitler sign what's called a concordat, or a political treaty, essentially, outlining the terms of the relationship between the Nazi regime and the Catholic Church. And so this protected the independence of the church, protected Catholics theoretically from persecution in Germany, and so on. Um, However, the Nazis, not surprisingly, did not follow the terms of the Concordat. And so, in response to that, them failing to keep the terms, Pius XI issued an encyclical, the only papal encyclical not originally written in Latin, okay, Mit brennender Sorge, with burning concern or worry. And this I will talk about on the next slide a little bit more, but this was a major opposition piece that really kind of set the Nazis off even further. And then especially after the death of Mussolini in Italy, the church was able to shelter thousands and thousands of Jews in Rome and throughout Italy. Okay, so the church was working mostly behind the scenes, um, In fact, the Pope after Pius XII, John the 23rd, he calls Vatican II. But John the 23rd, before he was Pope during World War II, was actually involved in issuing baptismal certificates that were forged, actually. So forged baptismal certificates for Jewish people. Okay, so basically, these Jews would present this forged baptismal certificate, and it was like, okay, I guess you're not Jewish. We won't kill you. Okay, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, because Catholics were under attack as well. Anyway, Spain and Mexico have anti Catholic revolutions and civil wars there, which ends up killing hundreds of thousands of people in those countries as well, some of whom were martyrs, not all of them. All right, so go ahead, pause, do question one. Okay, major events. So, World War I, 1914 to 1918. Okay, towards the end of that war, you get Fatima. Okay, that movie Fatima just came out. Maybe you're aware of it, maybe you're not. But Mary appears to three shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, from between May and November, I believe, were the months. And she warns them of a second Great War. Okay, so World War I's not the end of it. Excuse me. Warns of further persecutions of the church and attacks on the Pope, and warns against the spread of the errors of Russia. Okay, so she tells them to pray the Rosary every day for these things, for the salvation of souls, offer their sufferings in reparation for sins committed against Jesus and her own Immaculate Heart, and to pray against the errors of Russia. Later that year, November 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution happens in Russia, and Russia becomes communist. Okay, so then, of course, it turns on the church, which was actually the Orthodox Church for the most part in Russia. And of course, Russia then seeks to spread communism all over the planet. Okay, so very, very prophetic. Mary obviously knows ahead of time that communism in Russia is coming and is going to spread from there. So she tells them to pray against those errors. Okay. We will hopefully get to zoom in more on Our Lady of Fatima. So 1929, skip ahead. So the Great Depression happens around this time. All right. But 1929 also, Pope Pius XI signs the Lateran Treaty with Benito Mussolini, who was in charge of Italy at the time. Okay, so the Pope, some background on this. The Pope had basically been a prisoner of the Vatican. The Vatican, or the Pope, used to basically rule the Vatican, or the Papal States rather, which was a chunk of land in Italy, significant portion of land. The Papal States were attacked and overrun in the Italian Revolution in the 19th century. And so the Pope was basically allowed to live in the Vatican, but that's it. All the church's land was gone. So finally, the Lateran Treaty says, okay, Italy now recognizes Vatican City as an independent state. Okay, that's been the case ever since 1929. So we're coming up on 100 years now where the Vatican has been its own city-state. Okay. All right, 1931, Pope Pius XI issues Quadragesimo Anno, which is the 40th year. He is actually he is celebrating the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, which was Pope Leo XIII's landmark encyclical, which kind of set the stage for Catholic social teaching. Okay. I'm looking back now if I got the year on Rerum Novarum was 1891, so I need to go back and change that. Anyway, so Quadragesimo Anno is an important Catholic social teaching document. Okay, 2 years later, the Vatican signs that concordat with the Nazis that I mentioned on the last slide, where, okay, we're going to leave the church alone, let you teach the Catholic faith, and so on. And of course, the Nazis never kept that. So then 1937, mit brennender Sorg, I mentioned. Pope Pius XI writes this, has this written in German, and then has it snuck into Germany via motorcycle and taken to all the bishops, and then has it read from the pulpit at Sunday Mass all across Germany. So this is a very secret kind of infiltration mission here, which is actually really cool. And this is basically denouncing the Nazis for violating the terms of the Concordat and telling Catholics that they ought not be loyal. They should not be loyal to the Nazi regime. Okay, they can't go along with what they're doing. There's major pushback on this. The Nazis are not fans of this, as you can imagine. Elsewhere, the Spanish Civil War happens. In those 3 years there, 36 to 39, the persecution of the church happens there. Then we get World War II, of course, from 39 to 45. And then on a church-related note, uh, Pope Pius XII defines dogmatically the Assumption of Mary, that doctrine that Mary was assumed body and soul into heaven at the conclusion of her earthly life. Okay, so this is another instance of papal infallibility, defining doctrine authoritatively. Okay, do question 2. So major people, all right, the popes, of course. Benedict XV didn't get as much attention. He was pope during World War I, then Pius XI and Pius XII during World War II. Okay, Saint Jacinta, Saint Francisco, and then Sister Lucia. Those are the children of Fatima. So Francisco and Jacinta were visionaries. Lucia was also involved. She's the only one of them who's not officially canonized. All right, Maximilian Kolbe and St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, also known as Edith Stein. They were both saints killed in concentration camps. Maximilian Kolbe offered himself in place of a married man who was supposed to be executed. And then Teresa was basically found in the Netherlands and taken to the concentration camp and killed there. It's not as well known because, of course, the Holocaust was mainly focused on the Jews, but Catholics were also persecuted. So you had 3 million Polish Catholics who were killed at Auschwitz, including 2,600 priests. So not necessarily all of them were killed for their Catholic faith, but the Nazis didn't like Catholics, that's for sure. All right. You also get a series of great English Christian writers during this time period. Very familiar names. At least 3 of these will be. Okay. So you get Hilaire Belloc, who writes a book called The Servile State, which is another important, it's actually important for an economic theory called distributism. It's a very interesting book. But yes, he was an English and French guy. G.K. Chesterton, okay, he wrote Orthodoxy as his most famous work, but he wrote like literally thousands of essays as well, okay. Also C.S. Lewis, so Chronicles of Narnia, but also Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters and a variety of other books he wrote. And then my favorite, J.R.R. Tolkien, okay, he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So they're all in this time period as well. So it's an interesting kind of flourishing of English Catholicism. All right, go do question 3, and then you know the drill with these guys. All right, tomorrow's our last day. We'll cover from Vatican II up to the present.